It all started on a crisp autumn day when our company decided to launch a high-stakes project aimed at redesigning a critical internal system. The project was supposed to be a turning point for us. Our team was tasked with overhauling the system that handled our clients' most sensitive data, an ambitious and complex project that could potentially make or break our reputation in the industry. I, Peter, was given the lead role in the project. I had spent years honing my technical skills, and my colleagues knew that I was the one to handle such a task. I'd taken the time to review every detail, ensure we adhered to best practices, and drafted the roadmap to keep things on track. As I began assembling the team, I felt an air of quiet confidence. We had the right people, the right tools, and I was certain that we were about to deliver something that would impress not only the company but also our clients. However, as the project progressed, something felt off. That's when I noticed how my colleague, Jessica, had begun to hover around the project. Jessica had always been a bit of a wild card, an ambitious, assertive figure who wasn't shy about taking credit. She had a knack for getting herself noticed and inserting herself into the spotlight. At first, I didn't mind her occasional comments and suggestions. After all, the project was complex, and we needed all hands on deck. But soon, Jessica began positioning herself as more than just a collaborator. She started asserting her authority, offering suggestions that often overstepped the boundaries of what I had already planned. I was taken aback when she insisted on presenting some of our key findings at a company-wide meeting, findings that I had worked tirelessly to develop. I wasn't sure if it was simply her eagerness to contribute or something more, but I knew one thing for certain: this was the first sign of something brewing under the surface. I let it go at first. There was still a long way to go, and I was focused on the actual work, not on petty disagreements. I knew Jessica had a tendency to try and shine in front of management, but I never imagined it would go further than that. I told myself, let her have her moments. The work will speak for itself. But deep down, a small seed of doubt had been planted. Was she trying to steal the spotlight, or was I just being paranoid? It didn't take long for things to take a darker turn. One evening, as I stayed late to finalize some documentation, I overheard a conversation between Jessica and another colleague. She was discussing the project, but her words didn't match the reality. She was taking credit for ideas that were mine, ideas I had crafted and refined over weeks of hard work. The more I listened, the more I realized that she was positioning herself as the driving force behind the project, painting me as someone who had simply assisted. At that moment, I felt a sharp pang of betrayal. This wasn't just ambition anymore, it was manipulation. But I didn't confront her immediately. No, I wasn't going to play into her games. Instead, I made a decision that would require patience and precision. I was going to bide my time and document everything. Every move she made, every mistake she made, every violation of the policies and standards we had set in place for the project, I would remember it all. I knew that confronting her in the heat of the moment wouldn't accomplish anything. She was too good at covering her tracks, and any accusation I made could easily be dismissed. But if I played it smart, if I observed closely and let her dig her own grave, I would have a stronger case when the time came. And when she was caught in her lies, I would be waiting. As weeks passed, Jessica's behavior only grew more brazen. Her strategy was simple yet effective: take credit for every success, deflect every mistake, and make sure she was always front and center in every meeting or presentation. It became clear that she was trying to position herself as the face of the project, someone the higher-ups could look to for answers, solutions, and direction. I, on the other hand, was busy doing the real work. I was buried in the technical aspects of the project, reviewing code, troubleshooting issues, and ensuring our systems were compliant with security protocols. I was focused on delivering the product, while Jessica focused on delivering a version of events that painted her as the hero. There were times when I felt completely sidelined, like a ghost in my own project. The meetings, which I once ran with a sense of authority, began to feel like a performance for Jessica. She would interject, taking credit for my work in front of the entire team, explaining concepts that I had carefully researched, and offering solutions to problems I had already solved. It was maddening, but I kept my calm. I knew that any outburst would only play into her hands. She was calculating, playing the long game, and I needed to do the same. During these meetings, I carefully observed how she interacted with others. She was strategic, often using subtle tactics to manipulate the narrative. She would downplay the contributions of others, subtly undermining their work while building herself up. It wasn't long before the higher-ups started to notice her and seek her out for updates. She was becoming a darling of the leadership team, while I was left in the shadows, doing the work but receiving none of the recognition. I knew I had to tread carefully. I began documenting everything. Each decision she made, each presentation she led, every email she sent out that misrepresented the truth, I captured it all. I made sure to record her interactions with the rest of the team, noting how she would take credit for ideas and successes that were undeniably mine. At first, it felt like I was doing something petty, but I quickly realized that this wasn't just about me and her, it was about the integrity of the project, and the truth needed to be protected. One afternoon, things escalated further. Jessica requested a one-on-one meeting with our supervisor, Mr. Larson, to update him on the project's progress. I wasn't invited. I had been the one who worked tirelessly to build the project from the ground up, yet she was now positioning herself as the point of contact for any questions or issues. I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my stomach as I imagined what she might be telling him. After the meeting, I cornered one of our colleagues, Matt, who had attended. I knew Matt was always looking to climb the ladder, and I figured I might get some insight. He was hesitant at first, but I pressed him. Finally, he admitted that Jessica had claimed she was the one who had restructured the project timeline and made all the key decisions in our last sprint. She had even taken credit for the technical strategy that I had outlined and executed meticulously. That was the final straw. I knew I had to do something, but I still held my ground. Confronting her would only make matters worse. I needed to wait. I needed to gather more evidence of her actions, more instances where she manipulated the narrative to her advantage. She was going to make a mistake, it was only a matter of time. So, I watched. I kept my distance, continuing to work on the project while quietly documenting her every move. Her lies were becoming more brazen, and the gaps in her knowledge about the work we were doing were starting to show. She had never been as hands-on with the technical aspects of the project as I had. She didn't understand the systems as well as I did, and it was only a matter of time before she was exposed for what she truly was, someone who could take credit but not deliver results. The situation became even more tense when, a few days later, I overheard a conversation between Jessica and one of the senior developers, Jake. She was trying to convince him that she was the one responsible for the major breakthroughs we had recently made in the system's functionality. Jake seemed skeptical, but Jessica, ever the charmer, was persuasive. As she spoke, I could hear her carefully crafting a version of events that completely erased my contributions. It was a rehearsed, well-practiced performance that left me seething. But I wasn't ready to expose her yet. No, I was playing the long game. I knew that sooner or later, her confidence would lead her to slip up, perhaps in a meeting, perhaps in an email, or maybe in a conversation with someone who didn't know the whole story. And when she did, I would be waiting. Weeks passed, and I continued my meticulous documentation, adding to my growing collection of evidence. It was becoming clear that Jessica's self-promotion campaign was only intensifying. She was taking control of every meeting, dominating discussions, and positioning herself as the singular force driving the project forward. I could feel the weight of my frustrations mounting, but I knew I had to stay patient. Every mistake she made, every misstep she took, would only serve as fuel for my eventual retaliation. One morning, the moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. Jessica was once again in the spotlight, presenting our progress to the senior leadership team. As usual, she skillfully dodged any questions that delved into the technical specifics of the project, deflecting the focus to the big picture. She painted a perfect picture of the project, making it seem like everything was running smoothly under her watch, while conveniently avoiding any mention of the challenges or setbacks we had faced along the way. But then, a question came from Mr. Larson, our supervisor. Can you walk us through the recent code review and the steps we're taking to ensure the system is secure and compliant with regulations? It was a simple question, one that any project leader should have been able to answer with confidence. But Jessica, in her usual fashion, hesitated. The silence lingered for a moment before she answered, but her response was vague and imprecise. She stumbled through a few generic talking points, clearly trying to cover up the fact that she didn't fully understand the technical aspects of the system. I could see her confidence falter as the room grew quiet. Mr. Larson wasn't buying it, and I could see a hint of skepticism in his eyes. That was my opening. When the meeting ended, I immediately approached Mr. Larson with a casual request. I asked if I could speak with him privately about the code review process and the recent security concerns that had arisen. He agreed, and we stepped into a quiet conference room where I laid out the facts. I didn't accuse Jessica directly, but I made sure to explain the details of the security protocols I had put in place, outlining how they were being rigorously followed to ensure compliance. I subtly pointed out that the recent code review had been thorough, but that Jessica had been absent during the most critical stages of it. Mr. Larson listened intently, his brow furrowing as I explained the situation. I knew he had a lot on his plate, but I also knew that he trusted me when it came to technical matters. I wasn't trying to sabotage Jessica, at least not yet. I was simply making sure that my contributions were acknowledged and that my expertise was respected. What you're saying makes sense, Peter, Mr. Larson finally said. I'll look into this. Thanks for bringing it up. I left the meeting feeling a mix of satisfaction and frustration. I had planted the seed of doubt, but Jessica wasn't caught yet. The cracks in her facade were beginning to show, but she still had the upper hand. I needed more, something concrete that would expose her for the fraud she was. And then, it happened. The very next day, Jessica made her first major mistake. It started with a small oversight, a miscalculation in one of her reports. It was the kind of mistake that could easily be overlooked, but given the scope of the project, it was a serious error. Jessica had submitted a report that contained outdated information, misrepresenting the status of the system's performance metrics. The report included figures that were no longer accurate, figures that I had corrected in the last update but that Jessica had failed to incorporate. It wasn't a simple typo or a minor slip of the hand, it was a fundamental mistake, one that could have serious implications if it were presented to the leadership team without correction. I knew this was the opening I had been waiting for. I immediately took action. I reviewed the report and made the necessary corrections, adding a note to clarify the discrepancies. I also included a detailed explanation of the methodology I had used to arrive at the correct figures, emphasizing the importance of maintaining accuracy and transparency in our work. Then, I sent an email to Mr. Larson and the senior leadership team, pointing out the issue and providing my corrected version of the report. I didn't directly accuse Jessica of negligence, but I made sure my email left no room for doubt about who had caught the mistake. It was a calculated move. I wasn't trying to throw Jessica under the bus, I was simply doing my job. But in doing so, I ensured that my version of the facts was front and center, leaving Jessica's version of events exposed for what it was, a facade. The fallout was swift. Within hours, Mr. Larson sent an email to Jessica, questioning the discrepancy and asking for an explanation. I could almost hear her scrambling as she tried to cover her tracks. I knew this would be her first real test, the moment when her lies would begin to unravel. But I wasn't done yet. I had more in store for her. This was just the beginning. Jessica's reaction to the email was swift and defensive. Within an hour of Mr. Larson's inquiry, she sent out a frantic response to the leadership team, attempting to explain away the discrepancies in the report. Her tone was condescending, as if the error was a trivial matter that could easily be brushed off. She blamed it on a miscommunication between her and the data team, claiming that the outdated numbers had been inadvertently included due to technical issues with the system. I watched as she attempted to play it off, but something in her message didn't sit right with me. It was clear that she wasn't taking responsibility for the error, but more troubling was the fact that she was pushing the blame onto others. The data team had been working under my supervision, and I knew for a fact that there had been no such miscommunication. Her excuses were as thin as tissue paper, and I could see right through them. I wasn't about to let her get away with this. The report wasn't just a simple mistake, it was a critical document that would influence major decisions about the project. If Jessica had been allowed to continue down this path of deception, she would have sabotaged the project and, by extension, our reputations. But I needed more than just a miscalculation to bring her down. I needed to expose her for what she truly was, someone who couldn't back up her claims with solid work, someone who had been coasting on the efforts of others. So, I continued to quietly observe, waiting for the next crack to appear in her carefully constructed persona. It didn't take long. The very next day, Jessica made another fatal mistake. This time, it was during one of her presentations to the leadership team. As usual, she attempted to take credit for the progress the team had made on the technical side of the project, even though she had been mostly absent during the hands-on work. She fumbled through the details, glossing over the more technical aspects of the project. But when she got to a particular section, one that I had personally designed and implemented, she got it wrong. And I mean completely wrong. She spoke confidently about a feature I had built, but she described it in a way that was not only inaccurate but also completely misrepresented the purpose of the feature. She claimed that it was a quick fix I had applied at the last minute, when in reality, I had spent weeks designing and testing it to ensure it would integrate smoothly into the system. I could feel the anger building in my chest as I listened to her distort the truth, taking ownership of something she had no understanding of. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I had to act, but I also knew I had to be careful. The leadership team was starting to buy into Jessica's narrative, and if I confronted her directly, it could backfire. Instead, I decided to take a more indirect approach. I drafted a thorough technical document, explaining the intricacies of the feature, outlining the challenges I had faced in developing it, and providing a detailed timeline of the work I had done. In my email, I made sure to emphasize the importance of recognizing the true contributors to the project and ensuring that the team's collective efforts were accurately represented. I sent the document to Mr. Larson, as well as a few other senior leaders. Again, I didn't directly accuse Jessica of lying, but I made sure that the facts were clearly laid out. I wanted to ensure that the leadership team understood who had really done the work, who had made the critical decisions, and who was merely riding on the coattails of others. The response came quickly. Mr. Larson scheduled another meeting, this time with the entire team, to discuss the progress of the project. It was clear from his tone that he was beginning to see through Jessica's facade. As we gathered in the meeting room, I could feel the tension building. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Jessica walked into the meeting, her usual confidence now tinged with nervousness. She tried to play it cool, but I could see the cracks in her composure. She knew she was being cornered, and the leadership team had started asking the right questions. They wanted to know why she had failed to provide the necessary details during her presentation. They wanted to know why her reports had been riddled with inaccuracies. They wanted to know why the technical work was being misrepresented. Jessica's defenses crumbled under the pressure. Her usual charm and confidence were nowhere to be found as she stammered through her explanations. She tried to blame the mistakes on miscommunication once again, but it was clear that the leadership team was no longer buying it. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a brief moment when she realized that her carefully constructed narrative was starting to fall apart. I sat there, watching her struggle, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. This was what I had been waiting for. The truth was finally coming to light. Jessica had overplayed her hand, and now the consequences were starting to catch up with her. I had played my cards carefully, and now it was her turn to face the fallout. But this was just the beginning. I knew that the real consequences would come once the leadership team had all the facts. And when they did, I would be ready. I had everything documented, every lie, every mistake, every violation. When the time came, Jessica wouldn't just lose credit for this project, she would lose her credibility entirely. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for her to walk right into it. The next few days after the meeting were filled with an air of discomfort. Jessica, once brimming with confidence, now seemed noticeably on edge. She had been forced to backtrack in front of the leadership team, and I could tell that the cracks in her carefully curated persona were beginning to widen. Every time she passed by me in the office, I noticed the quick glance, the attempt to hide the unease behind a forced smile. The usual boldness that she had flaunted for weeks was gone, replaced with the tension of someone who knew they were on the verge of being exposed. Still, Jessica wasn't one to back down easily. She tried to regain control by sending emails to the team, reiterating her vision for the project, and attempting to position herself as the indispensable leader once again. She even started to play up her collaborative efforts, subtly suggesting that I was now a secondary player, a mere assistant to her grand plans. But despite her efforts to salvage her position, the leadership team had started to shift their perception. The seeds of doubt that I had planted were beginning to grow. I could see the subtle shift in how they interacted with both of us. More and more, they began seeking my input on technical matters, asking me for updates on progress, and acknowledging the work that I had done, work that had been largely overlooked in the past. Jessica, for her part, kept trying to assert herself as the project's leader. She started calling impromptu meetings, attempting to pull the project's direction back under her control. Yet, each time she tried to take charge, the leadership team grew more wary, more reluctant to take her word at face value. It was becoming increasingly clear to everyone that Jessica was no longer the trustworthy point of contact she once pretended to be. But I knew the real showdown was still ahead. I had made my move, but now I needed to make sure the leadership team understood that Jessica's behavior wasn't a mere series of misunderstandings or simple mistakes. This wasn't just about credit, it was about integrity, professionalism, and transparency. And that was where I would strike next. I began to compile a dossier. This wasn't just a collection of incidents, this was a carefully organized archive of every infraction, every policy violation, and every false claim Jessica had made over the course of the project. It included emails where she had misrepresented facts, internal memos where she had attempted to hide her lack of technical knowledge, and meeting notes where she had misled the team about the status of the project. But what would really nail her, I knew, was the documentation of her repeated violations of company policy. Jessica had bypassed standard operating procedures more than once, attempting to take shortcuts that could have jeopardized the project's integrity. She had dismissed security protocols in favor of getting ahead of schedule, and she had ignored feedback from key team members in favor of pushing her own agenda. I made sure to document every instance, every violation, and every potential legal risk she had introduced into the project. One evening, after everyone had left the office, I stayed late. I knew that Jessica had just submitted another report to the leadership team. It was a final push to regain control, to once again assert her dominance in the project. She had spent hours crafting a document that, once again, misrepresented the technical work, claiming credit for ideas she hadn't contributed to and offering vague explanations for issues she had caused. I couldn't let it go. I knew that this was my moment. I stayed up late that night, carefully preparing a response. I didn't just correct the inaccuracies, I laid out the facts in painstaking detail, backing up every claim with evidence. I included screenshots of emails, references to meeting minutes, and even attached portions of internal memos that demonstrated how Jessica had misled the team. I made it clear that the true scope of the project's success had been the result of teamwork and meticulous planning that Jessica had neither contributed to nor understood. The email I sent to Mr. Larson and the senior leadership team wasn't just about correcting one report. It was a thorough, unflinching look at Jessica's manipulation, her negligence, and her complete lack of accountability. I didn't make it personal, but I made sure they understood the severity of her actions. This wasn't just about taking credit for someone else's work, it was about endangering the integrity of the entire project. I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. The feeling of satisfaction was almost overwhelming. I had done what I needed to do, not out of vengeance, but out of a sense of responsibility to the team, the company, and the work that we had all put into this project. The following morning, I waited for the storm to hit. I knew that Jessica would try to push back. She would argue, deflect, and do everything in her power to salvage what little credibility she had left. But I also knew that the evidence was irrefutable. There was no way she could talk her way out of this. Her web of lies had grown too tangled. As the day progressed, the leadership team began to process the information. I could see the tension building. I could hear whispers around the office, murmurs of surprise and disbelief. Jessica was no longer the golden child, she was the villain in a story that had gone terribly wrong. The walls were closing in on her, and I was ready to watch her face the consequences of her actions. This time, there would be no escape. By the time the leadership team called another meeting, it was clear that things were about to come to a head. The whispers that had been circulating around the office about Jessica's actions had grown louder. There was an undeniable tension in the air as we all gathered in the conference room for what promised to be a pivotal discussion. I sat in my usual spot, trying to maintain a calm and collected exterior, though inside, I couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation. This was the moment when everything would be laid bare, the truth would be revealed, and Jessica would no longer be able to hide behind her facade. For weeks, I had watched her manipulate the narrative, distort the facts, and take credit for my work. But now, the leadership team had the full picture, and there would be no escaping the consequences. Jessica entered the room, her usual confident stride faltering slightly as she noticed the change in the atmosphere. She was still trying to project authority, still attempting to control the conversation, but the unease was evident in her demeanor. The leadership team, on the other hand, seemed unusually quiet, almost somber. Mr. Larson took his seat at the head of the table and immediately addressed the group. "We've gathered here today to discuss the recent developments regarding the project," he began. "There have been some discrepancies in the reports and presentations that need to be addressed. I want to make it clear that our goal is not to place blame, but to ensure that this project is on track and that we're moving forward with integrity and transparency." Jessica immediately launched into her defense. She spoke quickly, confidently, even aggressively, trying to salvage her position. She blamed external factors, miscommunications with the team, delays in receiving necessary data, and even technical issues beyond her control. As she spoke, I could see her trying to reframe the narrative, but her words fell flat. The leadership team wasn't buying it anymore. It was then that Mr. Larson turned to me. "Peter, we've reviewed your email, and we'd like to hear your perspective on the matter. Please, go ahead." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. I knew this wasn't just about me anymore, this was about the truth, about the integrity of the work we had all done, and about ensuring that the people who had contributed were properly acknowledged. I took a deep breath and began. "I'd like to start by saying that this project is a result of the hard work of every single person on this team. There's no one person who can take full credit for the success or the failures. That said, there have been some serious issues with how certain aspects of the project have been represented." I made my way through the points, calmly but methodically. I explained the discrepancies in the reports, highlighted the inaccuracies in Jessica's presentations, and pointed out the multiple instances where she had misrepresented both her contributions and the work of others. I showed the leadership team the emails, the meeting notes, and the documents that laid out the facts. I even referenced specific moments where Jessica had attempted to bypass security protocols and downplay the technical challenges that had been overcome. As I spoke, Jessica's face grew increasingly pale. Her earlier confidence had all but evaporated. She tried to interrupt a few times, but the leadership team wasn't giving her any room to argue. They were listening, absorbing the facts, and slowly beginning to piece together the real story behind the project's progress. Mr. Larson asked a few follow-up questions, digging deeper into the details of Jessica's involvement. She faltered under the pressure, and for the first time, she began to look cornered. She stammered through her responses, offering more excuses, but they were increasingly irrelevant. It was clear to everyone in the room that she had no concrete answers for the serious concerns I had raised. I wasn't done yet. I still had one final piece of evidence that would seal her fate: the policies she had violated throughout the project. I had kept a record of every instance where she had ignored or bypassed company procedures. I presented these violations one by one: how she had falsified some of the data, bypassed approval processes, and even ignored team feedback to push her own agenda. Jessica's composure finally cracked. Her face turned bright red as she realized she had nowhere left to hide. The leadership team was staring at her with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. It was clear that they had expected more from her, but she had failed to meet even the most basic standards of professionalism. Mr. Larson, who had remained quiet through most of my presentation, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made it clear he was not pleased. "Jessica, this isn't just about minor mistakes. This is about a pattern of behavior that has seriously undermined the trust we had in you as a leader on this project," he said. "Your actions have not only jeopardized the integrity of the project but have also put the team in a difficult position. We cannot overlook this." The room fell silent. Jessica sat there, visibly defeated, as the consequences of her actions began to sink in. She had played the part of the confident leader, but now she was facing the reality of her lies. She had been exposed, and there was no coming back from it. I felt a strange sense of vindication. It wasn't that I was happy to see her crumble, but I knew that I had done the right thing. I had stayed patient, collected the evidence, and made sure that the truth came to light. The project, the team, and my own integrity had been protected. Jessica's moment of glory had come to an abrupt end, and it was clear that the leadership team was now focused on moving forward without her. But the best part was yet to come. As Mr. Larson wrapped up the meeting, he made it clear that disciplinary action would follow. Jessica's behavior had crossed a line, and there would be consequences. I watched as she sat there, trying to maintain her composure, but I knew deep down she was already calculating her next move. However, this time, it wouldn't matter. She had played her hand, and she had lost. The truth had prevailed, and I knew I had played my part in ensuring that justice was done. The next steps for the project would now be guided by transparency and accountability, values that Jessica had failed to uphold. And as for me, I had proven that integrity and patience could outlast even the most cunning of manipulations. In the days that followed the meeting, the atmosphere around the office shifted. Jessica, once the shining star of the project, was now the subject of hushed conversations and sideways glances. It was as though the office had collectively realized that the person who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes wasn't the competent, charismatic leader they had believed her to be. She had been exposed for what she truly was, a fraud. The leadership team wasted no time in implementing consequences. While Jessica had tried to salvage her reputation by offering apologies and vague justifications, it was clear that her efforts were in vain. The damage had already been done. Her credibility was shattered, and there was no coming back from that. I watched as the fallout played out. Jessica's role in the project was officially diminished. She was no longer the team leader. Instead, she was relegated to a lesser position, working on menial tasks far removed from any decision-making responsibilities. It was a fall from grace that no one had anticipated, least of all Jessica herself. As for me, the reaction was mixed. On one hand, I had exposed the truth and ensured that the project was protected. I had saved my own integrity, and the work I had done was finally being recognized. But on the other hand, some colleagues looked at me differently. They didn't fully understand why I had allowed things to escalate to this point. Why hadn't I just confronted Jessica sooner? Why had I gone through all the trouble of documenting everything so meticulously instead of handling it in a more direct manner? I didn't have a clear answer for them. In hindsight, I knew that my approach had been cold, calculated, and perhaps even ruthless. But the reality was that confronting Jessica prematurely would have only played into her hands. She was too good at deflecting blame, at turning the tables and making herself the victim. I needed to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. And once the leadership team had all the facts, there would be no room for Jessica to wiggle her way out of responsibility. As the dust settled, I began to notice subtle changes. The leadership team, now fully aware of the kind of person Jessica was, began to rely on me more. My input was valued, my decisions respected. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly being seen for the work I had done. My contributions to the project were finally being acknowledged. I had spent so long working behind the scenes, often sidelined in favor of Jessica's spotlight, but now it was my turn to shine. The project, once in danger of being derailed by Jessica's manipulations, began to gain momentum again. With her out of the picture, the team was able to focus on the real work, and the progress we made was undeniable. Our deadlines were met, the system we were building started to come together, and the leadership team took notice. The trust that had been eroded by Jessica's actions was slowly being rebuilt, and I had played a major role in that process. But as much as I was satisfied with the outcome, I couldn't help but reflect on the toll it had taken. Watching Jessica's downfall unfold in front of me had been both exhilarating and uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of victory I had envisioned when I first started the project. There had been no triumphant moment, no sense of satisfaction in seeing her exposed for her lies. Instead, there was a lingering sense of unease, like something had been broken beyond repair. I couldn't shake the thought that things could have been different, that perhaps, if I had confronted her sooner, the entire situation could have been avoided. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Confrontation would have only fueled the fire, given Jessica the opportunity to manipulate the situation and twist the narrative once again. By staying patient, by waiting for her to make a mistake, I had ensured that her lies were exposed in a way that no one could ignore. But there was still a part of me that wondered about the cost of it all. Had I been too methodical, too ruthless? Could I have achieved the same result without going to such lengths? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the project was back on track, the team was moving forward, and I had earned my place at the table. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the work I did mattered. It had taken everything I had, patience, strategy, and a willingness to play the long game, but in the end, the truth had triumphed. And Jessica? Her name had become synonymous with failure, her reputation in tatters. She had been given a second chance in the company, but it was clear that the trust that once existed between her and the leadership team was gone. She would never again be the confident, self-assured leader she once pretended to be. The consequences of her actions would follow her for the rest of her career. As for me, I had learned a valuable lesson, that sometimes, the best way to win is to not fight at all, but to wait patiently, document the truth, and let the consequences take care of themselves. The battle was over, and I had emerged victorious, not with a loud declaration, but with quiet, unshakable resolve. The days that followed the meeting felt almost surreal. I had won, but the victory wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. Jessica had been exposed, her manipulations laid bare for all to see. Yet, as much as I had triumphed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. The satisfaction that I had expected from seeing her downfall never came. Instead, there was a strange quietness, a lingering question of what this all had cost. The leadership team, now fully aware of the reality of the situation, shifted their focus to stabilizing the project. Jessica's role, once so pivotal, was replaced by a new leader who was more competent, more transparent, and more in line with the values of the team. The project began to pick up momentum again, with new energy and direction. The systems that had been developed under Jessica's false leadership were tweaked and refined, and soon, the entire team was working as it should have from the start. Despite the changes in leadership, Jessica was still around, though barely noticeable. She was relegated to small, behind-the-scenes tasks, the kind that wouldn't affect the progress of the project. There was no fanfare, no farewell, just a quiet retreat into irrelevance. I didn't feel pity for her. If anything, I felt a strange satisfaction in seeing her completely sidelined. She had brought this upon herself, and now she would live with the consequences of her actions. Her reputation was ruined, and the people she had once manipulated no longer trusted her. As for me, life slowly returned to normal. The tension that had hung in the air for weeks began to dissipate, and I found myself once again immersed in the work I loved. My role in the project, once overshadowed by Jessica's influence, became more prominent as I took the lead on critical technical decisions. It was a small victory, but one that carried immense significance. For the first time in a long time, I was recognized for my abilities, for the work I had done, and for the integrity I had maintained throughout the ordeal. I had been a silent observer for so long, and now, finally, my voice was being heard. The leadership team began to rely on my insights more heavily, trusting me to guide the project in the right direction. My recommendations were taken seriously, and my contributions were acknowledged in a way they never had been before. I had earned my place, and there was no one who could take that from me. Yet, despite all the progress, I couldn't fully shake the bitterness of the experience. Watching Jessica fall, seeing her crumble under the weight of her own lies, had felt like a necessary part of the process. But it wasn't the triumph I had envisioned. The joy of watching her get what she deserved was short-lived, and I realized that, in some strange way, I had lost something too. Perhaps it was my faith in the system, or maybe it was the realization that the corporate world often rewarded deceit and manipulation just as much as hard work and honesty. The entire ordeal had left a sour taste in my mouth. I had played the game, and I had won, but at what cost? The project eventually came to a successful conclusion. We delivered the product on time, and it exceeded expectations. The client was happy, the team was proud, and the company looked like heroes in the eyes of the industry. But in the quiet moments, when the applause had died down and the celebrations had ended, I found myself reflecting on the bigger picture. Had I really achieved what I set out to? Or had I simply played a role in a much larger game, where the stakes were higher than any one person could imagine? Looking back, I knew that I had acted out of necessity. Jessica's actions had forced my hand, and I had responded with precision and care. But I also knew that I had crossed a line. In my quest to expose the truth, I had allowed myself to become part of the system I had once despised. I had become just as calculated, just as ruthless as those I had once opposed. The question remained, was it worth it? In the end, the answer didn't matter. The project was a success, and I had come out on top. I had protected the team, ensured the integrity of the work, and most importantly, I had stood by my principles. The story of Jessica's downfall would eventually fade into the past, just another tale of office politics and corporate drama. But for me, the lesson remained. Integrity, hard work, and patience were virtues worth holding onto, even in a world that often rewarded manipulation and deceit. And while I had been forced to play the game, I knew that I had done it on my own terms. Jessica had stolen credit for my work, but in the end, I had stolen something far more valuable, my own sense of self-respect and integrity. As for the future, I knew that I would never let anyone, no matter how clever or manipulative, take credit for what was rightfully mine again.